All right. We are.
We're on.
We're ready. Yeah, I am. What's that? What insurance? We are farmers. Sorry.
Yeah, that's the part.
Yeah. Yeah.
As opposed to State Farm.
Oh man, those are the only ads I see nowadays are insurance ads. That must be an indicator of my age or something, you know.
No, okay, time of day, if you're not finding pharmaceutical ads, you're definitely not very
Okay. Well, but we stream everything, so
good.
time of day doesn't really matter.
Oh.
But the Google Analytics have determined that I should be interested in insurance. Because all I see are progressive ads, farmers insurance ads. Yeah.
Medicine, any type of medicine.
That's what I'm saying, pharmaceuticals.
I don't see pharmaceuticals.
And you take this, you're gonna get this, this, and this, and this.
Here are the possible side effects.
Yeah. Oh, hey, I want something that's giving diarrhea, thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's funny how they change those words, unwanted anal discharge.
Yeah.
Like, you mean diarrhea.
Yeah.
But thank you for trying to make it sound even worse than it already did. Right? Okay, we'll get rolling. We're only a couple minutes late. And I apologize. I planned to be here at like 9:15 this morning and have everything ready to go. And I was lamenting. So Len messed up her ankle really badly playing pickleball about a month ago. So she is just now starting to be able to walk and put weight on it, but she can't drive because she messed up her left ankle, but we both have manual transmission cars, which is even worse, right? Like, because you don't need to put a ton of weight on the brake or the gas, but the clutch you need to be able to depress fully. So, but then she was out late for the first time last night with some friends. So she woke up late this morning, and I kind of have to help her get ready in the morning.
Now you know what we go through.
Yeah, right. So I was late for that. But then the thing that actually made me late was I couldn't find my phone, and it induced this blinding rage because I'm old. I'm young enough, or I should say, I'm old enough that I remember the days when all you needed was your wallet and your car keys, right? And you didn't have to worry about having that thing tethered to your hip, right? With the amount of anxiety that it induces, maybe you guys are free from this, but my generation, there's so much anxiety around where did I put my phone, you know?
I did that yesterday.
Oh my gosh.
I call my phone, I don't know where it's at.
Yeah. And the amount of times, I rarely lose my phone, I pride myself in it. Elen loses hers all the time, but never has the ringer on.
Oh.
Or vibrate. She's got it on silent mode all the time. And so I ask her, well, can I call it? And she's like, that won't help. There should be a way to override the mute. So anyways, that's why I'm
You can get one of those little cubes that hangs from the phone where you
I know,
go to the
right?
bedroom, press a button, and the phone starts.
Yeah. Actually, I've got a super nifty thing. My watch will buzz my phone. But the problem is it's got to be within Bluetooth range. So if it's not within Bluetooth range, yeah. So I'm walking around my house with my watch, like a dowsing rod, trying to find my stupid phone. Anyhow. Okay, so we're going to run this study from now, obviously, and I plan to be done. We will be done in one form or another by the week before Holy Week, by Palm Sunday. I want to do better this year of not stretching these studies, having more of a concise narrative arc to them. It's not necessarily that it's bad. It's just a personal goal. It's a personal goal because I'd also like to fit more studies in over the course of the year. Also, since we're putting these online now, I think it helps to know that you've got like maybe a 5-part or a 6-part study instead of a 17+ question mark study.
And do you have bullet points?
Not yet. Not yet. I don't do well with bullet points.
I know you don't.
But I'll explain why in a little bit. So we're going to be talking about, morning now. We're going to be talking about, you're not late, we just started. We're going to be talking about building a biblical model of discipleship. And it's funny because Elen asked me, she's like, what, I was like, I'm late. I need to get there, early this morning. I need to get set up. And she's like, why? And I'm like, wow, I'm starting a new study this morning. Oh, what's it on? She's like, and I'm like, building a biblical model of discipleship. And she says to me, I wasn't thinking about coming, and now I'm really not thinking about coming. I was like, no. You don't understand. This is actually going to be really interesting. But I'd have to explain why it's going to be interesting to you. And then I thought about it, and I'm like, maybe that's a bad sign when I have to explain why it's going to be interesting. But I'm going to do that now. I'm going to explain why I hope this is going to be interesting. So first question, discipleship. You've heard this word. This word has been used before, right? How many of you have participated in a quote-unquote discipleship process in your life as a church attending person? Or in a discipleship course, right? Am I the only one? Am I the only one? Kathy, okay, yeah. Linda, yeah. And what does that usually mean? Or what was that experience like when you participated in a discipleship course? Do you remember? Paul, what was your experience?
Well, the days in which that happened are now so almost foreign to me. It's shocking. But the idea of discipleship was circumscribed by the course. That is, the course was a inner varsity. I don't know if you've heard of
Yes, absolutely.
So that it was a kind of evangelical thing.
Yeah.
That assumed that there was something called a Christian life.
Yes.
Okay, so that because there was a Christian life, there was a Christian lifestyle.
Yeah.
That they always contrasted that with churchianity.
What's that? What's churchianity? Define that.
Churchianity was in the early 1970s in InterVarsity world, which I found ultimately, put my mind to sleep. If Lynn thinks this might put her to sleep.
Yeah.
Okay. But the world of basically dissing Christians who went to church but there was nothing in their lifestyle that said, this is a true disciple of Jesus. Right?
Yeah.
So I have to say that I did that because I wanted to understand what it was, how it was I could talk to people outside of just the church circle.
Yeah.
About faith.
Yeah.
And but what I found was there's a bunch of new laws.
Yeah.
In other words, there's a lot of ways to fail Jesus here.
Yeah.
Here's some about for you.
Yeah.
And so it's pretty Pelagian. How's that?
Sure.
Okay.
You might have to define that for people too.
Okay. So Pelagius is famously the leading heretic early in church history, who basically said Jesus is really, really cool, and you need him to go to heaven, but you also better do some things to supplement what Jesus did, or you're in big trouble. Yeah.
Which would be anathema to a Lutheran ethic, right? We put so much emphasis on grace being the
grace and gratitude.
Grace and gratitude.
Yeah, grace and gratitude. I think we should say always grace and gratitude because grace without gratitude isn't of much value.
Yeah.
But the practice of gratitude is really worthwhile. And so I just want to say that what was assumed in that was that we were all extremely, extremely grateful, even though it was at least semi-Pelagian, that we were extremely grateful that God had been so good as to die for our sins. And that's great, but what can I tell you? That overshadowing of, unless you're doing this the right way, you're really in, you're in peril, let's put it that way. And you can't be sure. Yeah. And the question I had from the whole thing was, how can you be sure you're ever doing anything right enough for a perfect God?
Totally. And I'm gonna recap some of what you said there, specifically because again, I think there's a lot of us here who haven't experienced this. I have, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, shockingly, right? We were immersed in a much more, so Fort Wayne is known as the city of steeples. It's that full of churches per capita. And I'm guessing that has changed somewhat, okay? But it wasn't so much steeples when I was there as there was lots and lots and lots of big box evangelical non-denominational churches right alongside mainline Protestant, right alongside big LCMS churches, because Fort Wayne is the site of one of the LCMS seminaries, right? So we also heard a lot of conversation around discipleship courses, right? And in fact, we ran one, I think, maybe my second year there, obviously trying to put more of a Lutheran spin on it at the time. But in many ways, it definitely carried with it that same sense of, what Paul was talking about is trying to essentially develop a personal religious moral or ethic that allowed you to live up to the expectations that went along with being a disciple of Jesus, right? And there's an important piece in there, which you said at the end, which is the purpose of this is to get into heaven, right? It's about your personal righteousness with regards to God.
Right, because it always starts with the Billy Graham question of if you were to die tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So there's that threat hanging over your head.
Yeah. So all this to say, we're not going to do that. This course has nothing to do with that, okay? But it's important that we name that. Go.
I'm just going to name one other thing, which is even at the time I was doing it, there's no sense at all in which sin is conceived of in the way that classical Christianity has spoken of it as being in bondage to our egotism or and many other things, right? That there's a bondage there. So the whole Lutheran premise of the bondage of the will is actually completely missed, and also the understanding that sin is systemic. It infiltrates the personal life in a societal ways and in historical ways. So they don't have any idea of a collective.
Yeah, and you're highlighting something which is really important there, which is this, at least, well, and I shouldn't say traditional, but this model of discipleship, which comes out of that era. But and why we're naming this is that this concept of discipleship pervades our evangelical culture, but by extension, our Christian culture to this day, right? In a lot of ways, our modern evangelical Christians are younger evangelical Christians are leaving Christianity behind specifically because of that. But when you talk about, or maybe you've had somebody door knocking before that asked you, "Have you found Jesus?" And that's kind of a caricature at this point. They don't start that way anymore. They usually ease their way into that question eventually. But that's where this is coming from, right? It's coming from this, are you Christian enough, right? And we do these discipleship courses as a way of defining what that means. And again, I'm saying this, and I never intend to ridicule, somebody else's faith expression, but for me, one of the things that does is that I think that a concept of, we're using a religious word here, discipleship is actually something that can carry great value with regards to what it means to be a person of faith who, quote unquote, follows Jesus. Okay, so let's start. We've kind of established what we're not going to be doing. We're not going to be establishing a new moral or a new ethic that we're all supposed to follow so that we can be more righteous and have a better chance of getting through the pearly gates. Okay, that's not what this is. That's not what this is going to be about. So in many ways, what this is going to be about is trying. And I'm checking myself because I'm trying to avoid using a lot of words that drive me nuts. Like one of the words that I hear all the time, rediscovering. Well, maybe we never discovered it in the first place, but that's a different thing. But what we're going to be trying to do is essentially build a model of what, we'll get to this in a moment, discipleship might look like, based purely on Scripture. So we're going to try to avoid, to the best of our abilities, pulling in cultural influences. We're going to try to do this to the best of our ability, based purely on the Bible.
For 5 months, you guys change everything.
Okay, Greg, you're right on time for adulthood. Pull up a chair and grab some coffee.
Coffee's what got me in here.
Hey, that's what brings us all here, believe it or not.
Jesse.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, by the way, the letter that you gave me, Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh, I figured that.
Yeah, that was what that
I
was.
just, kind of, sort of related to this, but just as a sidebar about what does it mean to be Christian.
Yeah.
I read an article the other day about Mahatma Gandhi.
Yeah.
And Gandhi said, I could easily become a Christian if it
Wasn't for the Christians. Yeah. Yeah, he said something along the lines of, I like your Christ, it's your Christians that I'm not so much a fan of. So here's actually another distinction is our intent, my intent, of course, is also not to develop an identity of being a Christian, okay? In fact, we're going to hyper-focus on this concept of discipleship, and we're going to be very, I'm going to try to be very careful not to equate that with being a basic follower of Jesus. And this is something that I've alluded to before, and we're going to expand upon this a little bit, is that I have a suspicion that once we start kind of fleshing out what discipleship or learnership meant in the gospel narrative, we're going to realize that being a disciple isn't necessarily the baseline assumption for all people. In fact, discipleship, or being a disciple, is in fact a unique role within in that time, the Jewish world, okay, but, and I would argue by extension, is also potentially a unique role within our world, which is no longer the Christian world. We don't live in Christendom anymore, but that being a disciple has a value that does not equate with being Christian. And we'll talk, that will become a little bit more clear. That probably sounds kind of weird right now. We'll get to that a little bit. Okay. So let's start with some definitions. Okay, so first and foremost, what does disciple mean? Has anybody heard that word? So you get a couple of words in Greek that we translate, right? And they can come out as apostle or disciple. But baseline, kind of the common fundamental understanding there is that it means a learner. It means somebody who learns. So we're going to talk a little bit of history, real quick, I promise. Real quick history here, okay? This actually will bear relevance in the sermon today. Jesus is around first century Common Era. In fact, Jesus' assumed birth date defines the Common Era for us, even though he was actually probably born 4 years before the attributed date. But, long story short, Jesus exists during a unique time in the world of Judaism, which is he exists during a Reformation that's already underway, which is a Reformation that had actually kind of happened about 150 years before Jesus, but is something that's ongoing, which is the transition from what scholars and historians will refer to as Temple Judaism to what during Jesus' time is referred to as not rabbinic, Pharisaic Judaism, okay? And this Pharisaic Judaism, which exists during the time of Jesus, also represents another transition point, which actually kind of happens over the next 600 years, which is the transition into rabbinic Judaism, okay? And what's fascinating is that this already has relevance into what we've just been talking about, which is kind of the major conflict in terms of what the Jewish people at the time were defining as being a Jew. So, kind of the same question. What does it mean to be a disciple or to be a Christian? This was up for debate a little bit in Judaism. So Pharisaic Judaism introduces an idea, which is that you are, as a Jew, expected to keep the law, right? This is the foundational idea, okay? Sadduceic Judaism, well, more properly defined as Temple Judaism, has a much bigger corporate understanding. This is the churchified version that Paul was kind of alluding to, which is that the institution of the temple, which, again, theoretically represents all of the people of God, all of the Hebrew Jewish people. It's the temple's primary responsibility to make sure the law is kept. So again, how do you do that? You make sacrifices. You follow the Torah, but the onus of responsibility really kind of rests in the center, right? What's happening with Pharisaic Judaism, which comes into being around 150 BCE, 170 BCE, is that there's a shift in that the Pharisees, people who we know because we hear about them over and over and over again in our Gospels, are advocating that, in fact, what the primary mode of being a Jew is following the Mosaic laws on a personal level. So it's not the temple who's bearing the onus of responsibility for making sure that the people of Israel follow the laws. It's actually individuals themselves who are therefore, responsible for keeping the law of Moses. Does that make sense conceptually? Okay. Now, what do you imagine happens when every person is now suddenly concerned? Not suddenly. This isn't happening overnight. This is a gradual thing. But when every person is concerned with making sure that they personally are following the law of Moses.
You become much more scrupulous.
Yeah. You become much more scrupulous. You become much more litigious, legalistic. But also, you have a lot of arguments over what exactly following the law of Moses means. Okay? You have debates over how you keep these laws, or what the proper interpretation of this law or that law is, which we're going to encounter in the gospel text today, purely by coincidence. I didn't plan this out. But what we see happening here then is a transition where the responsibility or the center for interpretation is no longer held in the temple. It's now held by teachers, or what become known eventually as rabbis. Okay, so rabbis become people who are creating a teaching, in other words, an interpretation of the Mosaic law. And one of the things that the Pharisees hold up over and against the Sadducees, the Pharisees hold up that it's not just the Torah that you follow, so not just what we call the Pentateuch, but also the prophets and wisdom and all of these other things that make up our Old Testament, that those are informative and authoritative as well too. But what rabbis do is rabbis are essentially creating a teaching or an interpretation of the law and espousing that. And so rabbis then develop followers, learners, what we might also refer to as disciples, okay, or apostles, people who are taking, and the language that you hear even in the Gospels is taking on the mantle, taking on the teaching of a rabbi. Jesus, early on in the Gospel, and all throughout our Gospel witness, fulfills the role of a rabbi. That is kind of how he enters into the religious conversation. In fact, this popped up not this past week, but the week before. It was in one of the Gospel of John texts where he has that parenthetical piece of, rabbi, which means teacher. Thank you, John, for that helpful translation. Gotcha. So, disciple. Disciple is a person who takes on the mantle or takes on the learning of a teacher, in other words, a rabbi. Okay. This is kind of our baseline that we're going to start with, which is we're going to be developing together. This isn't going to be me lecturing, hopefully, all that much. We're going to be developing together by looking at our Gospels, looking at our Jesus stories, what Jesus' mantle, rabbinic mantle, might have looked like. This is going to be our starting point, okay? That's not going to be the sum total of where we end up because, well, we'll see. I'm making promises that hopefully will follow through. Okay, so it's about learning. It's about learning from somebody who is giving a new teaching. Okay, what are experiences in your life of learning? Quick show of hands. How many of you went on to higher education after high school? This is not a shaming experience, by the way. How many of you went on to maybe a skill trade? What we would call like a VOTEC experience nowadays. How many of you joined the Army and got a different educational experience? Yeah, right? Yeah.
You did.
Yes, Matt. You and Matt are the two. Well, no, not the only two. Yes, sorry, Andy, I didn't mean to short you. But when we think of learning in a modern context, generally what we think of is an institution, right, which trains or teaches you. An institution which might consist of many teachers and many different subjects, okay? The learning that a rabbi is doing is, on one hand, more specific, but seemingly, in a contradictory manner, also much more broad in its scope. Okay. So again, what a rabbi is doing is teaching specifically with regards to Scripture, the law, the Torah, the other pieces of the Hebrew Bible, but also in Jewish thought, right, is saving the world, right? Because as a Hebrew person, as a Jewish person in the first century, and even arguably in the modern concept, the way that you fix things, the way that you fix the brokenness that we see around us is by keeping the law of Moses. Okay. When we start working through this, one of the things that we're going to be paying a lot of attention to are the teachings of Jesus. How many of you have had somebody say to you, I'm not really interested in Christianity because I just feel like people don't follow the teachings of Jesus anymore. Like, I'm all about that. No, you haven't heard that? Man, I run into that all the time. Maybe it's just, me and my pastoral role. And I think it's also a generational thing. I joke about, my haircut conversations. This is one that comes up quite a bit as well after the awkward, oh, you're a pastor, that's nice, or that's interesting, or they stop talking altogether. But one of the things that usually comes up if they keep talking is, somebody will eventually say, I've always, admired the teachings of Jesus, but just but I just think that, Christians haven't followed those. And it's this vague kind of amorphous concept of the teachings of Jesus. And I suspect that one of the things that's going on there is that there's this a comparison of Jesus as a teacher to other spiritual teachers in human experience, right? Whether it's like the Buddha or a Hindu Swami or other teachers who have wisdom to impart, right? We're not necessarily doing that either, because fundamentally, what discipleship, at least according to a biblical model, is it's about following, okay? But before we get there, it's about seeing or perceiving. So we're going to actually turn to the Bible finally after a half hour of me talking. So turn to the Gospel of John in the first chapter. And today what we're going to do with our remaining 27 minutes, is we are going to look at the opening experiences of discipleship across all four Gospels. And we're going to start in reverse order, kind of. We're going to start with the Gospel of John. And the reason I'm starting here is because John gives us sort of a more fleshed out or explicit, and I don't mean that in a bad form of that, explanation or picture of what becoming a disciple of Jesus looks like.
So which John is this?
Gospel of John, chapter 1, and we're going to go right down to verse 35. We're skipping way ahead, verse 35. And we actually just read this not so long ago. This is one of our gospel texts. I'm just kind of browsing to see how many of you have found that spot. Okay, starting at John 1, verse 35. The next day, John, so John the Baptist, was standing with two of his disciples. Okay, so right off the bat here, the concept of disciple, at least according to the Greek word that's being used here, is already a thing, right? So again, and this might sound redundant or needless to say it, or unnecessary, but Jesus does not invent the concept of discipleship. Okay, again, we're not in rabbinic Judaism yet, but what this says to us essentially is that there already is the idea of there being teachers with followers. Okay. So John was standing with two of his disciples, and as Jesus walked by, he exclaimed, "Look, here is the Lamb of God." An interesting introduction of symbology here in the Gospel of John. The two disciples heard them say this, and they followed Jesus. Pay really close attention to the words that are used here. So, kind of first question here is, does this mean that they literally followed him? In other words, they were a couple of private eyes tracking where he went? Or does this mean that they metaphorically or figuratively followed him? Maybe more of the literal here, but there's definitely something going on. When Jesus turned and saw them following, he said to them, "What are you looking for?" And they said to him, "Rabbi," parenthetical, which translated means teacher, "where are you staying?" There's a bunch of stuff here. Okay, and again, this was the sermon text for a couple of weeks back, and I alluded to several of these things. We could spend 5 to 10 weeks just in this passage, by the way. Okay, so first off, they said to him "Rabbi." They called him a teacher in the Hebrew and potentially the Aramaic. But notice that he says to them, "What are you looking for?" So, describing the scene, here are two disciples, two learners of John. They see Jesus. They start following him, and he turns around and asks them, "What are they looking for?" Right off the bat here, I'm gonna advocate that one of, at least according to the Gospel of John, one of the beginning steps of discipleship is curiosity. Okay? Is curiosity. Something that we haven't traditionally left a lot of space for in our models of defining a religious identity, right? We have historically, and when I say we, I'm really talking about the big we here, right? We've certainly done this in the ELCA and predecessor denominations and Lutheranism in general, but Christianity as a whole has not placed a lot of emphasis on curiosity. We placed a lot of emphasis on belonging, right? On understanding, but really on internalizing or taking on the identity of being a Christian, which means what we refer to as believing, right? So here are your doctrines or your tenets or your dogmas, and make sure that you are orthodox regarding these. Make sure that you are lined up. And by the way, I'm totally buying a whiteboard this week, so I have something to gesture frantically out and even write on when it takes my fancy. But again, it's been about, and maybe you all had different experiences, but for me, growing up at a small church in Northeast Michigan, which was mainly Norwegian and heritage, my early years were about learning insofar as here's the Lord's Prayer, here's the Apostles' Creed, here are the 10 Commandments, memorize those. We did do some conversation about what that meant, right? They wanted you to at least understand what we were talking about at a basic level. But when I went to church on Sunday morning, we did a lot of the same things we do now, which is, here are the things that we believe. Do you do you assent to these, right? Which is something, by the way, that I've always struggled is a strong word, but I always wonder how people hear the Apostles' Creed, which was something that we say in some form or another every Sunday. How somebody coming in from an external viewpoint might understand that, right? And it's really hard to articulate that in the short time that we have in worship, right? And I'm not going to get into too much detail. This is something that we're going to have a great conversation about on the road, but like, it's not necessarily that we're all saying we line by line, we assent to all these things. This isn't about confirmation, right? I've referenced before, one of my contemporaries, Nadia Weber, who's much more. When I say contemporary, I went to school with her. That's my point. We are not in the same realm of popularity, at least on a national level. But she always advocates that that's a communal statement, right? When we say the Apostles' Creed, we are as a community affirming our faith. And the way she puts it is each one of us believes a part of that, and together we make up the whole, which is a good way to think about it. But back to my original point, discipleship seems to begin with curiosity instead of assent to or affirmation of a statement of beliefs. Okay? Because again, if you think about it, you've got two guys who are disciples or learners of a different rabbi, John, the weirdo, right? The camel's hair clothes. I'm being snarky here. I don't know if that keeps actually that weird. Sounds like an interesting guy, anyways. Who see Jesus, and again, John says, "Look, there's the Lamb of God who's here to take away the sin of the world." And they're like, "Huh? How do we unpack that one?" like number one, what does John mean by that? But who is this guy that our rabbi is so impressed by? And so they, quote unquote, follow, in a literal sense in this case, follow Jesus. Okay, so they get to, and here's the question they ask: where are you staying? Where are you staying? Okay, from 2 weeks ago, the Greek word here is meno, right? Where are you abiding? Okay, so if you really wanted to theologize this question, you could hazard that perhaps what they're asking Jesus isn't just where's your hotel room, but where is your teaching situated, right? Where are you abiding? What are you about? And I think it's all of the above, right? I think they're literally asking, hey, we're physically following you. Where are you at? We want to hear more. But they're also, what's your story? What are you about? In other words, we're curious. Give us your elevator speech. Give us your elevator speech. But then here's the important part. This is going to be kind of our foundation for today and weeks to come. He says to them, "Come and see." Okay. So, does not give them an elevator speech, right? Doesn't say, well, here is where I stand on this law and this teaching and that teaching, and here's where I'm at with regards to our relationship with the Gentiles. And, doesn't do any of that. He says, "Come and see." And again, I've overly theologized this part too, but see in this case is ide, which is come and understand, right? So it begins with curiosity. But the first steps have nothing to do, in fact, with believing or assenting or conforming. They have to do with building upon that curiosity. Okay, so you've had an experience, or perhaps not. Maybe you've just seen something that draws your attention. And the invitation is simply to come and see. Come and learn. Come and understand.
Could it also be come and learn?
Yeah, but yes. Short answer, yes, it could be come and learn. And this is going to be really semantic and nitpicky. I want to separate a little bit. I want to put some space between learn and see/understand/know. Okay. Here would be my explanation of this. How many of you, and again, this might be a generational difference. How many of you debated as to what you wanted to study in higher education, or where you wanted to go, what trade you wanted to take on, right? What did you want to, when you hit that point, you're like, what do I want to do with my life? How many of you were really, yeah, I was there too. My sophomore year in high school, which is a really young age to begin thinking about what you want to do with the rest of your life. I I think we do that really wrong. But I took an aptitude test, which was supposed to tell me what I was supposed to study in school. And I tested, I mean, to be fair, I tested high in everything. Sorry, I can't help myself. But I tested especially high in chemistry and math and physics. And so then they gave you, okay, they said, here are your scores. And then they gave you a chart. I think it was like some kind of pie graph. So based on these scores, here are careers that might interest you. And guess, mine, you know, if you can imagine like chemical engineering being a pie piece, mine landed right smack dab in the middle, right? My score said to me, that's you, right? That's what you're gonna do. That's your destiny, right? Obviously, I questioned that because up until that point, I was really curious about botany. I thought plants were cool. I thought that would be a fascinating thing. And I know for a fact, and I can't remember who said it, but at some point somebody said to me, botanists don't make much money, Jesse. Sorry, and it turned out to be a longer story than I intended on. Okay, but what eventually happened then is when I learned that I was destined to be a chemical engineer, what did I do? I went and took a course at the local community college, which was an introduction to engineering, right? So basically, it was the course where somebody who was curious about chemical engineering could kind of get their toes wet, right? Could kind of figure out what might you be studying, what might that involve. It was, I will argue, not actually a good representation of what chemical engineering was about at all. You're just a glorified plumber, is what chemical engineers are, right? But at that time, that was the intent. When we talk about the difference between learning and this curiosity to know or understand, I think it's the difference between finding out about chemical engineering versus taking your second thermodynamics course, right? Because this is a tendency that we have as well, too, is that, think about it this way. What has been the traditional way, and I haven't done much of this since I've been here, and it's not, I don't know if it's good or bad, but when you all joined a new church, if you did over the course of your lifetimes, what was step number one? Did you take a class? Was there an introductory class? Maybe, maybe not. You were born into it. Yeah, same way I was. I have never changed denominational affiliation. Lutheran for life. Woo! But that has been an experience. In fact, I've had many people who have joined Milwaukie Lutheran since my tenure here ask me, well, is there a course that I have to take? Right? In other words, what are those list of things that I have to believe in order to be one of you all? Okay. I want.
First introduced him to Sunday school.
What's that?
We were first introduced to Sunday school.
You were introduced to Sunday school as a child or as an adult?
Child.
Yeah, and that's kind of the same thing. In that, you know, essentially, except you didn't get a choice in that matter per se. That was how you entranced.
I married into it.
You married into it. Did they attempt to convert you or make you Orthodox? I mean, they just let you in the back door.
Yeah.
What in the world?
And I realized later that what I thought was a baptismal certificate was a dedication or something like that in the Unitarian Universalist Church. So I was baptized the same day as my younger son.
Because your dedication didn't count.
Right.
Gotcha. and we're talking about this stuff with levity, and I again maybe I'm offering too many apologies here, but I don't intend to, by the way, ridicule or make light of what have been meaningful traditions for our faith experience. But again, we're trying to get in front of that stuff, right? We're trying to take a step back. This stuff comes after 2,000 years of tradition and cultural stuff, right? What might it have looked like? So, curiosity. What's going on here? Jesus' invitation specifically to these two dudes is come and see. What might that look like? If we were to say, talk about an introductory step, no courses yet. There's no courses, okay? But we're talking about taking those infant steps and being a quote-unquote learner, a disciple of Jesus. What does curiosity look like? What creates curiosity? Do you think, here's maybe a better way of asking this. Do you think that there exists, in the year of our Lord 2023, people who are perhaps curious about either Christianity or the person of Jesus, but are absolutely 100% terrified of churches? Yeah, yeah, man. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And let me issue a disclaimer here. The purpose of this course is not to develop a way to pipeline these people into our church, because this won't do it. It doesn't matter. This class is not gonna do that. But I'm not putting the cart before the horse. Let's just pause. Let's stop there. Okay, just take my disclaimer apart. Okay, but does it stand that there are perhaps people who are curious, but not necessarily committed to participating in this? Yeah, yeah. What might it look like? And this is maybe a little bit of a tangent here. What might it look? What does a gentle invitation to let people pursue their curiosity look like in a non-churchy way? I don't know. And I don't know that there's an answer to this. Okay, I don't know that there's an answer, because I think if we had an answer to this, the modern church would look a lot different. I think this is part of the gap here, is that we are not able to create, and this is modern, create space for people to simply be curious without trying to pipeline them into belonging, right? And again, we talked about this before about how we used to have that metric, belong. I'm never going to put a number. Belong, behave, believe, blah blah blah. And we talk about reversing all of those things. I don't think any of them fit anymore, right? In terms of behaving, believing, belonging, because even I would love the idea that people felt like they belonged to a community, whether or not they believe the same things. But belonging scares people in the modern era, right? How many of our younger generations are totally terrified by the idea of belonging to a political affiliation, or belonging to an institution, or belonging to an identity, right? No, we have reinvigorated the understanding of each person as an island. This is postmodernism in its purest form, right? So, this is really just a question: is what is leaving space? How do we create a space for curiosity? Maybe we can't create a space for curiosity, but discipleship seemingly begins simply with curiosity. So, come and see. I'll finish the paragraph here. They came and saw where he was mennowing, where he was abiding, and they remained with him that day. I should look up what that word is in Greek. It's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So one of the two who heard John speak and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He first found his brother Simon and said to him, okay, this has always been the conceptual leap that kind of leaves me behind. We have found the Messiah. What in the world? You haven't even heard the dude talk yet, but you're convinced in that moment that you found it. You found the one. And here's the problem, right? So we just jumped from curiosity, dipping your toes into the water, to both feet in the space of a second. This is the same question that I asked not last week, but I don't know. My weeks are going together. When they come and recruit Peter and Andrew and James and John who are fishing, and Jesus says, "I'm going to make you fishers of people," and they're just like, "Okay, let's go." What the heck? What in the world happened there? Maybe it's just Jesus. I don't know. But going on.
Isn't that our assumption, Jesse, that Jesus is of such magnetic personality, or whatever you want to say, so attractive?
Yeah.
That which becomes a new law for us.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Can I imagine Jesus as being so
Charisma.
attractive that it's love at first sight?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And if you don't produce a Jesus for me that's love at first sight, then you ain't got it, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah. Joe said it. He said charisma.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well. Oh man. This is another huge tangent. Go ahead, Linda.
Well, look at pop stars.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I look at some of them and going, why? But it's just a different generation looking at a different person in a different way.
With different hormones.
Different hormones. Yeah, that definitely factors into it. Yeah.
Jesse, how much of that could be those who wrote the scripture
Oh, totally.
that wanted to dramatize how dynamic Jesus
That's
was?
that's a really important insight, Jay. Which is,
You're talking propaganda here, Jay.
no, he's talking hermeneutics, man. He's saying, yeah, right? So, and here's the thing, is we don't get, this is the most in-depth description of this event that we get in the Gospel of John. Mark, Matthew, Luke, you get nothing. You literally just get the naming of the events. This is the only place where we get at least a little bit of an insight into the thought process that occurs here. But in any of them, that's it, right? You get curiosity to both feed in that. And I think you're absolutely right? Especially considering where in the historical Christianity John is written, which is in an era where we have left behind Judaism, the Reform movement of Judaism, and the Gospel of John is really in this era creating Christianity, creating a new thing. So I imagine that at least this Gospel writer has some interest in highlighting the charismatic, almost mystical attraction of Jesus, right? Which you were talking about. We've already kind of hinted at this, but I think this is maybe a good way to round out our conversation today. Is what are the no's of this? Okay, and the NO's. In other words, what are the dangers when we see this, right? We see James and John and Philip and Nathaniel and Andrew and Simon who have a 5-second encounter and jump in with both feet. Paul, you already alluded to it, which is we assume that that's the way that it's supposed to happen, right? We assume that people are supposed to. We'll get them curious about Jesus, and then you load the hook, right? You put out the bait, they bit. Now you set the hook, right? And I'm being snarky to a certain extent, but I think I'm also being a little bit realistic with regards to how much of our Christianity kind of views this. And that's one consequence of this, but the other is that I think in a world where you have thousands upon thousands of churches and or faith expressions and or pastors to choose from, there is this expectation, if you will, that pastors are supposed to be like Jesus. And I'm not helping with my long hair, even though Jesus' hair looked nothing like this, by the way. It was probably short and curly and a lot darker than mine is. But, the European artists thought this is what Jesus looked like. So, there we go. Now everybody tells me I have Jesus hair. But yeah, I mean, there is this built-in assumption that leaders in the church, right, need to be, as you said, Joe, charismatic enough to set the hook, right, to draw in the people who are curious. We're not talking about reforming church in this study. What we're talking about is trying to develop a model of what it might mean to follow, both literally and figuratively, Jesus for us, right? For us as people, right? This isn't about building a model of discipleship for other people. This is about building a model of discipleship for us, okay? So kind of the place that I want to leave us with today is to go back to where we started at, which is, do you have space for curiosity? Do you have space for curiosity in your spiritual life? Yeah. I think maybe beginning a model of discipleship means giving fuel to that, right? That being a follower of Jesus at its fundamental level means energizing this core part of what it means to be human, which is wondering, imagining, and being curious about everything. Not just Jesus, which sounds strange, but I really believe that being a follower of Jesus means being curious about the world that we're in, okay? Which might mean being curious about other faiths, other expressions of our faith. It might mean being curious about science, astronomy, engineering, God forbid, botany, right? And the important takeaway from this is that you don't have to be a pastor to be a star disciple, right? In other words, discipleship is accessible to everybody who's curious, right? I think, well, there's only a couple of us in this room who went the clergy route. You all went a different route. Something in the path that you took in life provoked your curiosity. Now, that's not to say that many of us didn't make choices founded upon necessity, right? Like how many of us went to school to get a job that paid well so we could feed our family and raise our kids in a nice home. Yeah, absolutely. Necessity factors into it. But I would argue that even now, in the twilight of your years, no, it's not. I don't mean that. But even perhaps after or aside from the thing that drew you to whatever job or career or lifestyle you found, you are still curious about a lot of things. That is a tool of discipleship. That is a tool of following Jesus, is looking upon the world with wonder. And I'll end on this note today. And that's important for several things, but it's also important because when you give space or give energy or fuel your curiosity, you also consequently create an openness in yourself for a new experience. Jesus has a really hard time entering into the lives of those who are already convinced that they know Jesus, right?
Just want a few times the thought that has struck me later in life now, which is that it's true. It sounds a little trite, but when the curious one is curious, the teacher will appear.
Yeah.
Again, our state of being open to learn is crucial for our soul. There's no other way to really learn. If I'm not asking the question, Jesus is going to come and say, hey, you guys want to follow? Sure, they'll follow. I'm going, nah, not today, thanks. Not today, thanks, because that's where I'm at.
That's
right
where
now.
you're at right now.
And I'm saying, I think Jesus is looking at that and going, oh, cool.
No problem, man.
Right? Others would say, uh-oh, turn or burn.
Oh, yeah, totally.
That's it.
Totally. And that's the other thing, Jay, back to your question there too, is, we ended up with 12 of these dudes. What about the 46 that were like, I'm good.
Yeah.
Not interested. Right? Because there have to be people who were curious and lost their curiosity, or were curious and got a little freaked out. Because they were like, this dude is radical, right? And is way beyond my comfort zone, right? Yeah.
But I can't afford college right now.
I can't afford, totally. Yeah, right. I'm curious about botany, but it doesn't pay that well. And student loans have a high interest rate, and I can't do it.
Really quick,
Yeah.
referring to the twilight of our years. The one advantage is that finally I have time for my curiosity.
Totally, yeah. Amen to that, sister.
I have more resources,
That's
whether it be on the internet. I mean, we grew up with the encyclopedia was the only resource.
so maybe you all, including me, are in the prime place to be amazing disciples because we have time, funds, and curiosity available to us. Next week we'll actually finally look at the other three gospels, but nothing to read ahead. Don't worry about it.